Hey everyone, thanks for joining us today for our Corporate Innovation and Unbundling CPG webinar. We're going to give everyone just another minute or two to join, and then we'll get started.
CB Insights will help you to find the next unicorn. Will help you to see where the smart money is investing. CBinsights.com will help you to discover the next hot industry. CB Insights.
Okay everyone, thanks for waiting. My name is Riley, and I'll be walking you through a few housekeeping items before turning it over to Anand for the presentation. So as with all our webinars, we'll be moving through a lot of data and insights and doing it pretty quickly. But we also want to make sure that we're answering your questions and keeping this relevant. So throughout the webinar, feel free to ask us questions using the questions tab within GoToWebinar or via Twitter using the hashtag CBI Unbundling. So don't worry about taking notes, as we'll be sending both the slides and the recording to you right after the webinar. If you have any technical difficulties during the webinar, your best bet is to reach out to the Citrix Help Desk. You can also tweet at us or send an email to webinar@cbinsights.com, and we'll do our best to help. But again, we'll be sending everything out afterwards, so don't worry too much. Now I'm going to hand it over to Anand to kick things off.
Hi everybody, this is Anand Sanwal with CB Insights. Thanks so much for joining today for our Unbundling CPG research briefing. As kind of the subheadline says here, what we're going to cover here is this idea of disruption by 1,000 cuts. And so there's a lot of threats and opportunities within the CPG space, and we're going to try to unpack those today. I think it's best to maybe start with an example of one of those threats that has sort of come out of left field. So this is an interesting article from the Wall Street Journal recently. In particular, this one is talking about consumer trends within India, and the highlighted portion in orange is what I want to call your attention to. It's this idea that kind of users or consumers are now spending more on data than they are on traditional CPG products. So this, I think, underscores one of the sort of the gravity of the changes coming to the CPG industry. And so it's not just product substitutes, which is what I think when we talk to our clients in the CPG space have tended to focus on. What are the new brands that are emerging that could shift people away from our products. I think that is obviously always going to be a threat, but the threats are now multiplied and they are in different areas, and that's what we're going to try to cover here. I guess before jumping in further, it's probably worth just giving you a bit of background on CB Insights for those unfamiliar. CB Insights is the technology market intelligence platform, and what that means is we've built software using machine learning and algorithms to predict, discuss, and communicate emerging tech trends using data. And I think that's a really fundamental part of what we do, and this idea that using data in ways that are really beyond sort of human cognition. And what that means and what that looks like is sort of illustrated here. Is there's a ton of kind of data exhaust as we think about it out there, whether it's mobile app data, website traffic, news mentions, venture capital financings, patents, government grants, social media sentiment. All of that is disparate and unstructured, and so what we've built is technology that will evaluate millions of unstructured sources all the time, ultimately sort of select and synthesize that knowledge about whether it's startup companies, whether it's industries, whether it's your competitors, to help you see kind of the opportunities of tomorrow today. And so fundamental to how we do everything is sort of this concept of what you see here on this page, and this is going to inform all of the trends that we're going to show you today. So all of these trends that we are seeing within CPG are rooted in the data that has been that we've kind of discerned off of the CB Insights platform. We are fortunate to have lots of the world's leading companies and brands using us. I think this comment from Microsoft here, I think, probably illustrates best what we help our clients do, which is find emerging trends, the shifts in technology, and then ultimately using that intel in an actionable way, which is letting them figure out where they have to reallocate resources. We are highly cited by the media, as you can see here. A little bit about myself. I'm the CEO and one of the co-founders of the company. This topic of disruption is one that's near and dear to my heart. I previously ran the Innovation Fund at American Express, which was a $50 million fund before building CB Insights. I also worked in venture and M&A. I'd written a book, and you see my educational background there. If you want to, we'll be sending out this presentation and the recording afterwards, but if you have any questions, my email, my Twitter handle is here, so definitely do not feel free to reach out. So we're going to start with kind of why CPG companies need to be paying attention to technology. I think it's not necessarily the place that CPG companies historically have thought to spend a lot of time, because this was the worldview of the consumer packaged goods industry, was what were substitute products that were coming. And so this was a popular infographic that we created a while ago called Unbundling Procter & Gamble. And this was looking at all of the upstart brands that were kind of attacking the individual categories that Procter & Gamble is involved in. And there's no doubt that disruption of the CPG space may come at the hands of new products, but again, that is just a part of the problem. And so we're going to kind of talk first about what's happening that's causing these new threats to emerge. And so what it really comes down to is that today there's a lot more experiments than there ever have been. And this is, if you use the Clay Christensen disruptive innovation framework that you see here, is that the idea being that today's experiments go on as they become more sophisticated to become tomorrow's problem. So today, if you look at the time axis in the performance, an experiment, a startup may begin with a use case with a technology that is ultimately not highly performing, but over time that quality of use case improves, and eventually they sort of move upstream and start to be able to pluck off your most demanding use cases. And we've seen this time and time again. If you look at Uber, right, it started off as a black cab service and now is, has carpooling and UberX and other opportunities that basically democratize access to this level of transportation. You look at eBay, started off with Beanie Babies and then moved up into automotive and art and other kind of high-end products. So we've seen this arc play out again and again, and today the experimentation has sort of increased to a level that makes it especially kind of alarming for incumbents. And so the reason that these experiments are multiplying is illustrated here. So back in 2000, I worked at an internet startup, and it was extremely expensive to launch a startup with servers, routers, and all the hardware required. You were looking at millions of dollars. And now with the likes of Microsoft Azure and Amazon and Google, that same level of infrastructure you can spin up quickly and cheaply, and this is data through 2011. It's conceivable and likely that this will go down to $500 in the next couple of years, and it may already be there. So what that means is that it's a lot easier to start a company and start a technology product. It doesn't mean that it's easier to scale them, but the idea being here now that there's a lot more flowers that can potentially bloom, and some of those flowers end up becoming the problem children for you as incumbents in the industry. The other big trend that's worth paying attention to is this one of the lifespan of incumbents. And so this is looking at the S&P 500 over time. And what you see is back in 1950 or 1955, it was basically 60 plus years before an S&P 500 company fell out of the index. And so if you were the CEO of a company back then, you really didn't need to worry too much, because by the time your company was going to fall out of the index, you were going to be dead. Now we look at the time frame, it continues to compress. It's getting down to sort of 10 years. And so a lot of that change, or a lot of this pace, has been accelerated by technology. And technology adoption, again, is a big driver of this. So again, this is a great sort of illustration of how quick technology is getting adopted today. If we start at 1900 and you look at the telephone, it's that orange dashed line. And if you just look, it takes 105 years before the telephone gets to 90% penetration. And then if we kind of move your eyes over to the right, go to about 1990, look at the internet and the cell phone there, so the dotted black line and the solid orange line. Within 15 years, the cell phone got to a similar level of penetration. So what we're seeing here is that the ability to propagate technology trends has accelerated to the point that this is what really makes it challenging for incumbents to react and stay on top. And then even within technology, that pace is accelerating. So here we're taking examples of extremely high growth technology platforms and looking at, and just we'll take Facebook as an example. So by any objective measure, Facebook was a rocket ship and continues to be an amazingly fast growing company. Gmail, Twitter, etc. And then you look at something like WhatsApp, which Facebook ultimately acquired, and how quickly it's scaled. And this is happening now even more and more. So platforms are reaching a critical mass at a pace that, again, we haven't seen before. And then now, once you have a platform with this level of consumer uptake, the opportunities for what you can do with that are obviously quite powerful. And so now the question becomes sort of how you as an incumbent are going to react to it. And so there's obviously many ways to do that. There's one approach, which is just assume that nothing's going to happen, sort of the head in sand approach. Just assume that these startups are going to fail, or that there are advantages that you have as an incumbent that will protect you. It's one approach. For those of you who are on the call, I'd imagine you're not taking that approach, otherwise you wouldn't be here, but this is the approach we would advise against. The reason for that, and we often hear that, that startup's going to fail, or that technology is not going to work, or we've seen that model before and it can't scale. And you're probably right. I think there's nothing, it's sort of an intellectually lazy argument to argue that a startup will fail, because most of them will, right? And so this was an analysis we did using our data, where we looked at the number of companies that sort of were seeded, and then how many actually were able to scale to a fifth or sixth round of financing. And you see that the numbers decline pretty quickly, right? By the time we get to a sixth round of financing, there's only 1% of companies left. So some of them M&A and IPO along the way, but it's hard to build a really large company, a technology company. It requires lots of capital, and the Darwinism of venture and angel and private equity financing eventually catches up, and so it does make it hard to grow. So saying that a startup's going to fail, again, is sort of, it's true, but it's sort of an intellectually lazy argument. I know pessimism often sounds smart, but it doesn't really work. And the reason for that is, when you look back at the dot-com boom, and we'll look at e-commerce in particular, these were a bunch of companies that didn't do well. I actually was fortunate, or unfortunate, depending on how you look at it, to work at Cosmo.com, where we kind of proved that buying something for $2 and selling it for $1 is not a business model. But you could look at these companies and say, okay, the e-commerce won't be a thing. This is not going to work here. These business models are all unsustainable. These are foolish startups. They don't understand X, Y, and Z about our industry, which is so hard. And looking at these 6 examples, you'd have been right. The problem with that is that some survive. And so when you look at, out of that wreckage, who came out of it, Amazon, eBay came out of it, and you better believe that everybody in consumer packaged goods, in retail, is talking about Amazon a lot, right? And so it's not all the companies that will fail that become the problem. It's the 1 or 2 that survive that become the real thorn in your side. So other big thing here, just again, to think about as a CPG company, is that this is not a tech industry thing, right? So I think we often will hear that, well, we're sort of immune in some ways from technology, or that's not coming to our world. And so when we look at various industries, we see it across the board. This is an example of Airbnb's kind of valuation over time versus incumbent hospitality services companies, right? So Airbnb is definitely a technology platform, but who they compete with and ultimately are going after is the Starwoods and Marriotts of the world. And we're seeing that again across industries. So this is the website of Wells Fargo and all of the startups attacking the individual products and services that Wells Fargo offers. You have the unbundling of banking. This is Europe. So again, this is not a US Silicon Valley thing. This is a global phenomena. You have it in logistics. You have it again in hospitality, as mentioned. We kind of tongue-in-cheek even said that technology is disrupting walking. We have the automobile, obviously a lot going on there with autonomous vehicles and connected cars. Business B2B services, things like paychecks. You have your industrial companies also being attacked. So, and then of course back to P&G. So the CPG industry is being attacked again at the product level. But let's go a step further, and I think we'll dive into not just the products, but the entire sort of customer discovery and journey process is being unbundled by technology within CPG. So let's kind of walk through that. Software is eating every part of CPG, and so what does that process look like, right? So sort of, I'm going to, at a very high level, walk through that. There's the identification of customer need, which is done typically by sort of product market research at a CPG company. Then R&D creates a product. There's some feedback iteration loop that happens. Eventually, a new product comes out of that. And then historically, CPG companies would say, okay, now we need to create awareness, which would basically mean bombarding folks with newspaper, TV, maybe some online advertising, so to create awareness. So brand advertising and marketing became very important. And then again, historically, the process was, we'll drive you to a store where that customer purchase would happen. And so retail distribution became kind of the end goal for a lot of these efforts. Each part of this process, so again, a lot of the focus tends to be on the new products that might be coming to unbundle us, but what we're going to see is that every part of this process is being changed and disrupted. So let's start with kind of the identification of customer needs. So how is product and market research changing? Again, technology platforms and companies are changing how we do things here. So at the market need or customer need perspective, you have things like crowdfunding. So whether it's Kickstarter or Indiegogo or Circle Up that are helping you or that are helping emerging brands figure out if there is demand for their product, getting funding to get that off the ground. So kind of essentially letting consumers vote with their wallets as to whether there's need and demand for a product. Then you have sort of niche communities where commentary is being left that again helps to highlight customer need and opportunity. And then you have funding sources like accelerators that are now increasingly getting involved in helping to essentially seed upstart brands and technologies which are going after elements of the CPG space. Here's kind of the crowdfunding example. So here's Indiegogo and sort of a program they had for this tonic. And again, you have this opportunity now to put an idea in front of consumers, get immediate feedback, and that feedback is not in the form, in this case, of qualitative commentary, but in the form of, I would buy this if you build it or make it. And so now you see dollars being put to product testing. When we talked earlier about kind of commentary and how that uncovers market needs. So this is a trend of virtual reality. And so what we're seeing here is the news media mentions over time. And so this is directly from the CB Insights platform. And what we think is if we can listen to what is happening in the media, we can help to illustrate and uncover emerging tech trends the same way that if you were to listen to Reddit or Food 52 or any of these sub-communities, you'd be able to understand maybe what kinds of products and desires and product needs do consumers have. And so virtual reality, as an example, what we saw was that media chatter really stepped up when Facebook acquired Oculus for $2 billion. So that's kind of that inflection point that you see here. However, if you were paying attention to media, you actually started to see chatter start to increase over time because virtual reality conversations started to ramp up in those niche sub-communities. So part of it is knowing where to look for it, and then second part is having sort of the technology tools to be able to discover those trends, right? Because you can't have an analyst trolling around and trying to synthesize this information, right? There's just too much noise in all of it. But if you had access to sort of media chatter, you'd have actually seen that VR was starting to gain traction and starting to be talked about in sort of what are more esoteric, niche, vertical communities that folks don't necessarily pay attention to unless they're part of those sub-communities. So again, identifying the customer need, there's a lot of signal out there. How do you do that? And then here you see accelerator investments into CPG companies and how they've stepped up. So just the level of activity into consumer packaged goods competitors has increased because it's become easier for young upstarts to build a product and determine build a sort of minimum viable product and assess product market fit before they ultimately go on to raise more funding. Then there's the next part of the cycle, which is the feedback iteration loop, right? And so now, again, there's tons of new technologies here that are allowing you to get real-time feedback, that are allowing you to get feedback in ways that is not relegated to focus groups and sort of market research that has been historically done. So things that will do sentiment analysis, that will look at even facial analysis. In-store analytics is another big area. So there's a lot of opportunity there as well. Then you move to the creation of awareness, right? And so here, it's obvious that things are changing, right? So your traditional channels, newspaper, radio, TV, have sort of really fallen out of favor, and here you see that in terms of change in advertising revenue over the last 2010 to 2015 period. While those have all declined or grown very modestly, you see Google and Facebook are obviously taking advantage of that. So the awareness landscape has shifted dramatically, and so that is obviously creating opportunity, also creating a little bit of chaos for CPG companies. The other big thing in awareness, I think, is a more of a sort of a trend with regards to consumer expectation. So this is a quote by Nick Carr. At the end, it gets a little preachy, but we'll focus on kind of the bolded elements. And so this idea that people really care just about excerpts and samplings and about the parts. So what this is really kind of highlighting is this idea of the attention that you once could command, or that TV, for instance, commanded, is no longer there, right? And so when you think about the industries that have typically been your partners in creating awareness, those are undergoing massive change right now. So you have the media industry, you have the newspaper industry. Those are kind of undergoing their own tumult right now. And a part of that is because people have moved away from giving you 30 minutes of their time and being distracted by their mobile phone or their iPad or their laptop or whatever else that they have in front of them. So this idea of a fragment society is really important when you think about how are we going to create awareness going forward. The journey from kind of understanding and knowing about your product to ultimately purchasing it is also a lot more convoluted or complicated, right? And so again, like, you see kind of all of the different ways that you're trying to get people to know about your product, to make a decision to purchase it, and then ultimately get retained and become advocates for it. There's a lot more touch points in that awareness and action journey. And then the other big challenge here is that determining which platforms you want to be part of, right? So there's a lot of fads, right? And so what we've done here with that CB Insights Trends tool is look at various kind of technology platforms that were hot for a sort of a brief minute, right? So you look at Meerkat, which was kind of live streaming, or Turntable.fm, or the Yo app, which let people essentially text one another with the words Yo. And you see kind of how quickly things can gain traction and then how quickly they fall out of favor. And so again, what that means is understanding there's a lot of signal and noise here, right? So if you were to go and say, okay, when Meerkat was taking off, which is the purple line, hey, we need to be looking at this, you'd have quickly kind of spent some money and spent some time on that and just as quickly realize that that's not going anywhere. Again, that might be a signal of a trend that's coming, which is live streaming, but being able to discern which technology platforms have staying power versus which ones don't is incredibly important, and that's one of the things that we're doing with the trends capability on CB Insights. And this kind of shows you some of the one-hit wonders within the technology space, which make it harder for you as a CPG incumbent to understand where you should be allocating your time and resources. Again, more on the awareness, right? So you have the ability to get real-time feedback via kind of all these different media channels. You have influencer networks, you have omni-channel engagement. So again, this idea that people are on all of these different devices, and in the morning they see your advertisement on TV, and then do they see it on their mobile phone later, and then do they come to the store, and how do you tie all that together? It's an incredibly difficult problem, but this is something that's incredibly now important, and there's a lot of companies and upstarts that are trying to tackle this this idea of omni-channel engagement. You see just a handful of them here. And then finally, you have this idea of customer purchase, right? It ultimately comes down to somebody buy the product. And so when we look at your incumbent distribution partners, and this is looking at the trend of sales at grocery stores, the trend is not pretty, right? So you have, again, you had your media partners were under duress in the awareness side, and then on the purchase side, the retail distribution side, you have your retail partners also under duress, trying to figure out how their business models are going to change. And so while they're changing, that's going to impact you, right? We've heard now stories of Walmart and Procter & Gamble, with Walmart now doing potentially more private label brands, right? There's going to be this tension that gets created, and when a business isn't doing well, folks have to look for opportunities, and sometimes that creates a little bit of destruction of prior relationships or prior arrangements that you've had with partners. This was a recent graphic or analysis done by Bloomberg, which looked at the top 20 retailers in 1995 versus 2015, and Walmart has held its ground and stayed up top. But you see that list has changed pretty dramatically, right? You have companies that were acquired, companies that just sort of have fallen out of favor. You have kind of companies like Home Depot, which keeps on trucking and has gone up. And then, of course, you have your Amazons and Apples of the world that have come up. But, the landscape is shifting, and so who you're going to be partnering with on the retail distribution side and how you are going to do retail distribution is changing. CPG has been rather immune from e-commerce for a long time. It's a relatively small portion of sales today. There's no reason that it's not going to face the same path towards online or mobile that a lot of other categories have. So that is coming in the very near future as well from a distribution perspective. Then, of course, you have your emerging e-commerce channels, Jet, obviously, which was just acquired by Walmart for $3.3 billion. You have companies that are trying to change the retail experience. So again, none of this means the retail in-store experience is going away anytime soon. But now, how do you improve that experience with sensors or with coupon applications that get folks who do come to the store, and those customers who come to the store do tend to spend more, so the purchasing intent is there. So how do you get better analytics on those customers? How do you target them in a way that gets them the best products when they need them, at the time that they're looking for them? So there's still a lot of opportunities in retail experience, but it's become increasingly competitive, obviously to get shelf space and obviously to get the attention of consumers while they're there. Then you have different business models on the retail distribution side. You have subscription commerce, so there's, Ipsy, Dollar Shave Club, again, big acquisition by Unilever. Then, looking further out, there's the more sort of speculative thing. So there's concierge, sort of programmatic. So the idea of having your food delivery and kind of product delivery companies like Postmates or Instacart, and then you have companies like Alfred or Magic, which are essentially bots that you can text what you need to, and they will get you whatever that product or whatever that service is. So again, do CPG companies get disintermediated in that process? And if you just were to say, I need detergent, do they just go and get you whoever they got the best deal from? And so again, you're losing maybe some of that direct access to the consumer, and that also comes bear in the connected home. So again, you see this with what Amazon is doing with Alexa, but a lot of other companies, whether it's Sonos or Jibo, are also thinking about the connected home. And so if you can start to make requests of your connected home device to procure products that you need, what does that mean for your place in the mind of a consumer, right? Again, if it's like, I need pasta, right? Or I need detergent, right? If it's just a matter of saying it to your Alexa or your device, and that will go figure out what to get you based on who's given them preferential pricing or based on reviews or whatever else it might be. What does that do to a CPG brand, and what does that do to their product distribution process? So again, the unbundling goes well beyond this. CPG disruption, they need, obviously CPG companies need to be vigilant about products that are out there. This is not to say that they don't, but that is, again, just the tip of the iceberg. At the same time, it's worth understanding that your peers are not standing still. This is a tool from CB Insights called the Business Social Graph that looks at the investments, acquisitions, partnership activity of your peers. And so you see here Unilever, AB InBev, Coca-Cola, etc. Where are they investing? Where are they acquiring? Whether it's their venture team, whether it's the corporate parent. So your peers are not standing still. There's tons of startups. What I would say is that the threat tends to not come from the old guard, right? So the reality is that sort of really disruptive, discontinuous innovation very rarely comes from giant competitive peers. There's some very large, predominantly tech companies that still are quite good at innovation, but they are the exception more than the rule. And so if you think of yourself as King Kong, Godzilla is not the threat. When I was at American Express, we spent a lot of time thinking about our big peers and MasterCard, Visa, Citi, etc. And often the conversation was about sort of basis points amongst them. And I think the reality is, while we're spending time thinking about basis points, you have this sort of squadron of startups that are coming after your commas, right? The entire customer journey is unbundling here for CPG, and this disruption by 1,000 cuts is being inflicted by all of these sort of best-in-class products and services and business models and technologies that these startups are building. So this is the thing that you guys need to be cognizant of as the incumbent, is all of these upstarts that are coming after you. Again, and they're coming after you through the entire kind of customer journey. So with that, again, my name is Anand Sanwal. I'm from CB Insights. If you have questions, feel free to drop me a line or hit me up on Twitter. If you'd like to dig into CB Insights, obviously reach out to me as well. I'm happy to take you through it and how we kind of came to a lot of these conclusions. This is us. Thank you again for the time. Have a great day.